For months, I was afraid of a school bus. Every morning, before it even appeared at the end of our street, I was already crying. I was 13 years old, and I knew exactly what was waiting for me when those folding doors opened. The name calling, the humiliation, the feeling that there was nowhere on that bus for me to hide. Then one evening, my father said something I never expected to hear. And the next morning, I climbed onto that bus a different person. By the time I stepped off, something inside me had changed forever. Welcome to Riverleaf, Episode 7, The School Bus. This is the story of the day I finally found the courage to stand up for myself. Let's begin. When I was growing up in Massachusetts, I remember that my father had always loved airplanes. After several successful years in business, he rewarded himself with what he considered the perfect toy, an airplane. Flying became his greatest passion. Unfortunately, he also had another passion. Almost every evening, after work, he'd stop and buy a six-pack of beer before heading to the airport. Then he'd climb into his plane and spend an hour or two flying around the countryside. Looking back today, I can hardly believe he did such a thing. Once or twice a week, we'd hear the familiar roar of his airplane approaching the house. A few seconds later, he'd flash overhead, no more than 50 feet above the roof, rocking his wings from side to side to say, "Hello." He thought it was hilarious. One afternoon, however, he learned that his little joke wasn't funny at all. Our neighbor, Mr. Dodd, raised beautiful Arabian horses. He kept 4 beautiful animals inside a fenced pasture beside his house. As my father's airplane thundered overhead, the terrified horses bolted in every direction, racing wildly around the corral. Mr. Dodd happened to witness the whole thing. That evening, shortly after my father returned, the telephone rang. Now, I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. There simply wasn't any need. Mr. Dodd's voice echoed through the entire room. "If you ever do that again, I'll have your pilot's license." My father's face turned bright red. I had never seen my father react like that before. The man who was normally so confident, so certain he was always right, suddenly became apologetic. He promised Mr. Dodd it would never happen again. Watching him humble himself before another man was almost surreal. It was one of those very few times I ever saw my father admit he'd been wrong. Despite all his faults, there was a moment when even he understood he had crossed a line. Around the same period, something else was happening in my life. I had known a girl named Nicole ever since first grade. We had never been close friends. We simply attended the same school. Nicole was a petite, blonde girl with bright blue eyes who lived in a modest ranch-style house with her parents and 4 siblings. Her father worked at the Raytheon factory near Worcester. Her mother stayed home to care for the family. Then, for reasons I never understood, when we were both in 7th grade, she suddenly wanted to become my friend. I thought that was wonderful. One afternoon, I invited her to my house. The moment she walked through the front door, I sensed something was wrong. Our house was considerably larger than hers, and I watched her quietly looking around at everything. The furniture, the rooms, the yard, the pool. Something in her expression unsettled me, and I couldn't explain why. A few days later, I understood why. Every morning, we rode the same school bus together. Nicole had a close friend named Rosie, and we always sat in the back of the bus together. One day, soon after Nicole's visit to my house, the two of them started yelling ugly names at me. Just a few at first. Soon it became constant until we arrived at school. They started encouraging the other children not to let me sit beside them when I entered the bus. Nicole rarely did the dirty work herself. Instead, she was the instigator, telling Rosie to start as soon as I got on the bus. She simply smiled with satisfaction while Rosie carried out the verbal attacks. Days turned into weeks and finally months, and the bullying continued. I don't think people realize how exhausting bullying can be. It isn't just the words. It's knowing that tomorrow and the day after that, it's all going to happen again. Every morning before the school bus arrived, I was already crying. I'd stand by the front window watching for the bus, wishing it would never come. The moment those folding doors opened, my stomach tightened. I knew exactly what was waiting for me. The ride to school lasted only 15 or 20 minutes, but to me it felt like hours. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to stop it. I tried ignoring them. That didn't work. I tried pretending it didn't bother me. That only encouraged them more. The insults became crueler, the laughter louder. Eventually, I began believing there was something wrong with me. That's what bullying does. It convinces you that maybe, just maybe, your tormentors are right. One evening, after another miserable day, I finally reached my breaking point. I was sitting at the dinner table with my family. I remember fighting back tears as I tried to explain what had been happening. For several minutes, my father simply listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask questions. When I finally finished, he leaned back in his chair. He thought about it for a moment. Then he looked straight at me. "Here's what I want you to do." His voice was calm. "Tomorrow morning, get on that bus and sit down. If Rosie starts again, warn her. Warn her once. Do you hear me?" I nodded. Then he said something that shocked me so completely, I wondered if I had heard him correctly. "If she doesn't stop, you have my permission to defend yourself." I stared at him in disbelief. "You are giving me permission?" He looked me directly in the eyes. "That's right." I couldn't believe what I had just heard. My father, the strict parent, had just given his 13-year-old daughter permission to fight back. That night, I hardly slept. Part of me was terrified. Another part of me felt something I hadn't felt in months, a sense of power. For the first time since the bullying had begun, I wasn't afraid of getting on the school bus. I almost welcomed it, because this time I knew exactly what I was going to do. The next morning, I climbed aboard the school bus feeling strangely calm. It surprised me. The fear that had followed me every morning for months was gone. I didn't need to look toward the back of the bus. I already knew Nicole and Rosie were there, waiting for me, as always. I quietly took my seat. The bus pulled away from the curb. The engine rumbled, and children laughed and talked around me. For a few brief moments, everything was peaceful. Then, right on cue, it all began again. Rosie's voice rang out from behind me. She called me names, one insult after another. That was the moment. I stood up, walked towards the back of the bus, and confronted Rosie. After months of bullying, finally lost control. A fight broke out. Then, bizarrely, the bus driver simply pulled over to the side of the road, set the brake, turned around in his seat, and watched. To this day, I don't know whether he was shocked or simply didn't know what to do. The other children were shouting, and it was almost over as quickly as it had begun. Realizing it was over, the bus driver started up the bus and continued on to school. No one said a word for the rest of the ride. It was so quiet, you could hear the engine rumbling beneath the floor. When we finally reached school and I stepped off that bus, all the courage I had felt disappeared. And suddenly I began to cry. I ran across the schoolyard looking for one of my friends. I needed someone, anyone, to tell what had just happened. Meanwhile, Nicole and Rosie ran straight to the principal's office, expecting sympathy. Instead, the principal sent for me. Still shaken, I walked into his office. He listened patiently as Nicole and Rosie told their version of events. Then he turned to me. Quietly, I explained everything. The weeks of bullying, the name-calling, being excluded from the other children, the tears before school every morning. And then I hesitated. Finally, I admitted something that must have sounded unbelievable. My father told me to warn her once, and if she didn't stop, I had permission to defend myself. The principal's eyes widened, and then he leaned back in his chair. He studied the three of us for a long moment. Then he nodded. He believed me. Instead of punishing me, he warned Nicole and Rosie to stop harassing me. For the first time in months, I walked out of his office feeling free from my tormentors. Looking back, I'm amazed by the whole thing. Frightened little girl who cried every morning before boarding the school bus was gone, and she never returned. Looking back now, I don't smile because there was a fight. Violence has never been my way. In fact, I hope it never becomes anyone's first choice. But I do smile when I remember what changed inside me. That morning, I discovered that fear only has power over us as long as we surrender to it. Bullies thrive on silence. They thrive on intimidation. And they thrive on believing their victims will never push back. The day I found my voice, their power disappeared. That lesson stayed with me for the rest of my life. Years later, I would face controlling parents, a difficult marriage, financial hardship, and people who tried to tell me how I should live my life. Whenever that happened, somewhere deep inside, I could still see that frightened 13-year-old girl climbing onto the school bus. Only now, she wasn't afraid anymore. She had learned something that would shape the rest of her life. Sometimes the first person you have to fight for is yourself. Thanks for listening, and until next time, take care, and I'll see you in the next episode of Riverleaf.